welcome to The Future Is Now Daily. I'm Francis-Santiago. This is our new edition of a daily uptake of information because the future is literally now. The world is at a brink. We're at a slope, and it's our duty to inform one another as a decentralized, disruptive community of innovators. What can we do to shift the world in the right direction? Really, we have to act now, because if we don't, we might just plunge into another dark age for all we know. I mean, let's look at the facts that are happening now. The Fed cuts interest by 100 interest points. Borrowing levels have come to zero. Cheap Dow loans, a whole lot of liquidity provided to ease the stress of the markets. Trump's plan of a whole array of ammo has been dumped into the economic system. And what's the reaction? Well, nothing really major has happened, unfortunately, to ease the pain of the market. None of these bullets really provided any substantial help. The S&P 500 is down by 5%, the oil barrel is down to $30, and the whole economic pandemic is simply in its baby steps yet, with already borders being closed just a few hours ago announced in the EU. Then we had, of course, the United States before that. We have other countries that are following the lead. This is all halting the economic development and the innovation and the disruption of the world. Although some markets are up, and we will talk about that as well, which ones are the hope for the future, shall we say. But let's look at the case of the most impending pandemic, and that's the economic pandemic, really, that's been caused by the coronavirus. Now, it is not something to be toyed with. This is a real thing. And if we look at this article from the New York Times, with two employees of Wuhan hospital that were on the front line, came down with the virus, and yet only one of them survived. Both were in their 30s. According to some more studies from the Wuhan, with the biopsy by the head doctor there, biopsies of those affected by the virus, it leaves a scarring of sorts in your respiratory system that is similar to what you experience if you have SARS and AIDS. This is not a joke, really. We're at a brink where we can come together to contain this, and by containing, that means not allowing your children, like a few mothers in Russia that came back from Italy from a vacation without even a thought that their child could have been exposed to this. They allowed them to go to school. And what happens next? The pandemic spreads. This virus quadruples. It does not double. It's an exponential growth. If you look at this graph between the SARS and the coronavirus outbreak, as you see, the SARS was slow and steady with more death rate, yes, but this thing is like this. Still less death rate at this point, but we're only at about 170,000 infected people worldwide as of today, March 16th, 2020. So again, whether the rumors that this is a manufactured virus or not by China or America are true, regardless, the whole world is now the hostage of the situation. And the only way to stop the curve is to contain. And in order to contain, you must not think that this is some kind of a joke. You must really take precautionary action, limit your travel, limit your unnecessary gatherings, go virtual, and we'll talk about that in a few. And of course, improve your hygiene. That means using antiseptic, using those silly masks, whatever you got to do when you go to places that could have potential danger. You have to take precautionary action. And let's talk about the pandemic of perhaps manufactured view. Let's explore this idea for a bit. The polemic that has been created, of course, to divide and conquer, as always is in sort of emergency cases like this, and the economic reboot that comes with it. If we look at any other events that have sufficient proof of being false flag, from 9/11 to Gulf of Tonkin to whatever, it's always a point of control that is inserted into the mix. And then an economic restart that comes with it. And regardless of the rumors that this is a bioweapon that perhaps was created by China or America and shot either way, regardless, both sides are screwed right now, it seems, and the whole world along with it. And for more on this, let's introduce Kevin Murcko, the founder of European Crypto Association, joining us live from Estonia, I believe. Yes?
Yes, correct, yeah.
Wow.
From Estonia.
How is it over there, Kevin? How is everything?
Well, we're not as into the mix yet as, let's say, Spain or Italy, that's for sure. But schools are closed down. We've started to see, the run on the shelves in the supermarkets. So toilet paper has become a hot commodity. But we are progressing toward more and more of a state of craziness. And I think over the next maybe 10 to 15 days, we're going to see that, unfortunately progress further and further forward or backward, I guess, depending on how you're looking at it. When I first saw this and first saw the reaction in China, what you were seeing was essentially what seemed to be a rather mild disease and extreme conditions that were applied to people around what was supposed to be a very mild disease. So that automatically got, I'm not crazy, I don't think, but I do like my occasional conspiracy with breakfast. So that got my head thinking about, why do we see such a huge reaction to what seemingly is just another respiratory illness. I mean, we get one of those out of Asia once a year. We usually get a decent one. When I say decent, that one that has at least a certain amount of spread every 2 years. And funny enough, almost every election year, every second year, we tend to have a decent size respiratory illness come out of, you had, so I guess swine flu was the one that went off that list that started in Mexico. But outside of that, you had SARS, you had MERS, all these different, usually happen on a 2-year basis. So it was surprising to me that we saw such a reaction from China, which led me to believe that they know something that we don't know. And now I think what we're seeing is kind of a combination of many things all at once. I mean, we've never really seen, in my lifetime, so I'm over the age of 40, in my lifetime, I've never seen, let's say, this type of global issue when it comes to, not even the health side of it. The economic side is something that we haven't even seen the complete effects yet. But on the health side, I've never seen anything like this. I mean, we've seen epidemics and we've seen things called epidemics or pandemics in the past, but I've never seen something that has spread. And when I say spread, I don't necessarily mean the spread of the virus itself. I mean simply the spread from one person to another, the fear, all these things seem to spread so much quicker. But we're also in, this age of social media. We're in an age where everyone is connected all the time. And I think that's probably one piece. Now, whether it was manufactured or not, like I said, I have my own conspiracies about that in my head. I think it's possible, but I don't know how probable it is, to be quite honest. I think what it is that we have this kind of, perfect storm. You have bull markets all over the world that have been in equities and in bonds and different markets that have been there for almost a decade for little or no reason. Right? Off the rebound of the last financial crisis, we basically had bull runs throughout the entire world. And why? Has the economies of the world been really all that stable? Have they been producing more? No, not really. The GDP out of China, numbers out of China that are normally manufactured, all these things, and we've come to a perfect kind of hilt where there's now so much fear around this pandemic. And that fear has now pushed into economics.
That's exactly what I've sort of also been angling at, is that indeed it's a perfect economic pandemic. I also believe that there's just no way we've seen the whole economic effect of this just yet. An interesting analysis about Bitcoin in particular in our disruptive space community is that Bitcoin has definitely not died, but a lot of investors that have been the fortunate owners of Bitcoin, especially those that have been working at the fund markets with funds and hedge funds and so forth, have began seeing huge losses because of this fairly unexpected avalanche, and they needed to quickly refill their deposits to basically divert a complete liquidation of their assets. But because their deposits were at the hedge fund and fund markets, and they were bigger than the deposits that they actually had in Bitcoin, the only way for them to properly exit this situation was to fully dump all the Bitcoin that they had in order to safeguard the superior to its some deposits. Now, Bitcoin will cease to be dependent on hedge fund and fund markets when its capitalization is going to basically come close to the capitalization of the fund markets. These are tens of trillions of dollars, really. Under that sort of capitalization, Bitcoin is, well, supposedly by math, would cost 1,000 times more than it is now because of its limited supply and emission. Perhaps this whole recent crash of crypto, which shouldn't really be that tied to the traditional market as we always hoped for anyway, as a disruptive community, that hey, the markets can do whatever. If the markets go down, we grow stronger, right? But that certainly hasn't been the case here. But again, this theory that I'm propelling at you at now, basically in short talks about the fact that it was a great opportunity to make almost a 50% dump and refill at that bottom, which means that soon, again, yesterday's small dump of another, what was it, 8% or so on the crypto, on the Bitcoin price anyway, was expected as the markets opened in the morning. And now we're supposed to see a certain upside as this 40 to 50% dump is starting to be filled in with new orders and new takers that see the opportunity in getting BTC at this low price. What do you think about this theory?
Well, I think we should, if we go back to the initial white paper on Bitcoin, right? I've heard a lot of people make an argument, or make two arguments. There's two main arguments when people talk about Bitcoin and what it is, right? It's either a store of value, which is one of the main arguments, and the other side of that, well, obviously there's some people that argue that it's a payment method as well. So we'll stick with those two: payment method and store of value. I think that a lot of people that get involved in Bitcoin aren't from traditional markets, and they've never been through any other type of real stress test on the market. And there hasn't been that many in the last 30, 40, 50 years. This is definitely one of them that we're going through right now. But Bitcoin came out of the last stress test, which was basically the 2008 financial crisis, right? Obviously, the initial white paper was written before the major crash, but it basically came out of that time period, right? At least not the white paper, but the actual ideas behind Bitcoin started before that crash actually happened. And what we've proven, I think, to this point so far, is that Bitcoin, it's hard to define. If you consider it as a store of value, then you're saying right now that it's a better store of value than anything else out there, which I guess we've probably proven to not be the case. And I think when it comes to what we're looking at is that most, or I would say almost all institutional money that went into Bitcoin for one specific reason. And that reason was that they felt it was an uncorrelated asset, non-correlating asset, an asset that wouldn't correlate itself to the rest of the market when there was some type of market crisis. And again, at least up till today, it's been shown that that's not necessarily the case. So the question now has to come back to all these fund managers. Do they actually believe that their bottom really is in? And I can tell you that, first of all, technicals in a market that's only 10 years old are, well, a waste of time. I mean, forget about moving averages, forget about stochastics, forget about MACD, forget about any indicator you want to put on a chart. They are a complete waste of time. I think we're way too driven right now globally, and I'm not talking just about crypto markets, but we're being driven right now by fear. And there's only two types of markets when you break it down: it's fear or greed. Right, and when there's a fear-based market, capitulation can happen multiple times, not just at one price point, not at two. And generally speaking, how markets work is there's supply and demand, right? Most people understand that terminology. Now, that means that even when everybody's selling, somebody's buying. Now, what are the lasting effects of what's going to happen with this pandemic or ecodemic or whatever we want to call it? Nobody knows. Everybody talks about airlines. They're talking about cruise lines and things like that. Those are low-hanging fruit, right? Because what people don't understand is that if the airlines have issues, that means people can't move. And if people can't move, that doesn't just affect tourism. It affects everything. So I think we've seen just the cusp of this. And from a pure look, I'm a crypto. I'm involved in crypto. European Crypto Association. You mentioned it. I also own an exchange called CoinMetro. I also own a market infrastructure company that deals in the tokenization of assets. I'm in this industry, and I'm in it pretty deep. But I have to tell you, from a trading perspective, if you're buying now thinking this is the bottom, I think you should step back and sit on your hands. It very well could be the bottom. I'm not saying it isn't. What I'm saying is there's absolutely nothing that can tell you, if you take off your tinfoil hat and put on your thinking cap and really look at a chart, there's nothing telling you right now that this is the bottom.
The thing is that the Federal Reserve has emitted over $1.5 trillion to try and support this crisis. We haven't seen the money yet. People were waiting for this to happen today, Monday, as the markets opened, and again, it's an uncertain situation there, but as far as BTC price, we see that it's still in that vicinity. It's holding around the 5K. It is down, but it's holding. Now, the further crash of the S&P market is highly dangerous, and this is something that the Federal Reserve definitely does not want. It's not going to do any good for the Fed. There's really no way of knowing if this is truly the bottom. But still, I believe that lucrative 40% intake is a good take for the market makers in the crypto world right now, and that's why there's this tug of war right now on this 5,000 level. What would you say to that? Is this still something that's uncertain to you?
I think from a macroeconomic trading angle, 10 years worth of charts isn't enough to really find. I mean, you can look, if you're a day trader and you use 5-minute candles or 1-minute candles, you can use 4-hour candles as support and support your trading entries and exits. But in terms of really a macro scope, 10 years is nothing. And really, I would say that most of those support and resistances, look, the only reason most support and resistance work is because people tend to look at the same values. It's not so much that there truly is support there, as people are simply placing orders where they see that there's some type of correlation on a chart, right? That's why they're there. It has nothing really to do with the underlying support. The problem is that, again, institutional money came in because, and you can, if you ask any of the biggest institutions that has money in crypto or Bitcoin for the most part, about 99%, their reasoning is a non-correlated asset. And we've proven up to this point that it is not a non-correlating asset. That hasn't that assumption that smart money used to come into this market has been proven incorrect, at least up to this point. Regardless of what kind of new asset you have on the market, people always run to cash in times of crisis. And the reason for that is when you run to the supermarket to buy the last roll of toilet paper and fight with 7 grandmothers, to see who gets the last roll, they don't take Bitcoin for the most part, and they don't take gold, and they don't take silver. They take cash. So at the end of the day, when panic hits the market, cash is king, and it still is king. It's still king over any asset. We can make the argument that Bitcoin is still better in many ways, and I'm sure we could make those arguments all day long between me and you.
The chess game has certainly begun, and I'd like to finish off with my last question, possibly one more, if we want to cover the markets that are actually seeing growth in this, and that's of course, e-learning, iGaming, virtual meetings, etc. That's all picking up space. Microsoft, IBM, I think they're buying into Alibaba. There's huge demand now for digital goods, digital entertainment, and everything that has to do with you sitting home. So these are the obvious beneficiaries of this wave. But let's go back a bit to the larger scope of things, Kevin. This would be my question. Who do you think is benefiting at the top? Because this is certainly not affecting, Trump personally. This is certainly not affecting, Putin personally, or Xi Jinping personally, or any of the, let's say, the global world elite. Who is actually benefiting from this on the top? If we are to stay with the idea that this is perhaps a manufactured crisis.
So obviously from a political, we are in an election year. I said before that for some reason, every election year we have some type of airborne pathogen that gets pushed around the world. At least for the last roughly 7 to 12 cycles, we've had one. This would happen to be the biggest. But so from a political angle, you can make an argument. Now you can make the argument that from a political side, it's hard to be a winner when you have. But if you're an incumbent and you're a very, we'll take the U.S. is just an easy example in this case. If you're the incumbent in a party that either people hate you or they love you, and there's really no middle ground, and you have a statistic behind you that says, statistically speaking, in the United States, if you're the incumbent president and the economy is better off than it was when you got into office, you will win re-election. You have a global pandemic that causes the markets to fall and go into bear territory, somewhere they haven't been in 12 years. You could say that from a larger macro angle, well, the Democratic Party in the United States has a lot to gain by the current pandemic, and the more that they can spread that fear, and the longer that fear lasts, because it could backfire on them as well. I think that when you talk about playing chess, what happens from the Democratic Party, for example, in the U.S., should we get to, let's say, May, it's respiratory disease, starts to get humid in the United States, gets hot, less people start getting it, the numbers go down, people are happy again, they go out. Because of that, they for months. What is the first thing they want to do when they get out of the house? Spend money, right? They're going to go to restaurants, they're going to go to the movies, they're going to go on vacation, they're going to travel. They just want to get out. And that could boost the economy by leaps and bounds. And if that happens, it could backfire, meaning that come November, which would be months after this virus is kind of behind us, at least wave one is behind us, it could actually turn out that the economy is even better than it was before we started. And then it's backfired. But I think from, if you wanted to take a real...
Interesting point. I mean, but that, again, you just answered the question of how it can benefit the establishment, this whole thing.
Anytime a government pushes fear, you always have to be ready for one of your, let's say, rights to be taken away in the name of the fact that it's going to reduce the fear. I.e., terrorism is here. Now you need to give KYC when you're going to go, buy a pair of shoes at the mall, and everybody's okay with that because, well, terrorism. And now, what are we going to give up? Which one of our rights are we going to give up now because of the fear-based mongering that's happening around us?
Well, I mean, look at the lines at Costco, somewhere in Middle America. I just saw that video yesterday. I mean, look at the absence of tools. It's a full-on military regime that is being sort of enabled worldwide. It's perfect. This is something that's been I think if you study the last 20 years of geopolitics and just the overall push on the people by those at the top, that has always been the goal, to create this almost robot-like submission, right, where the people become the cattle beyond what they've been the last century or so.
Just to make a quick prediction here for you, I can almost guarantee you that as the numbers look, millions of people are going to get coronavirus. That's just the reality. Millions will get it. Millions will be infected. But I guarantee you the death rate will fall substantially. And I think what most people most people aren't good at math, period. But most people can't think conceptually outside of, what's in front of their face. We had a respiratory illness that started in a country where you can't even breathe the air on the best day of the year because it can make you sick. And you had infections that started in communities that were vastly over the age of 60. So the death rate in a country in a city you can't even breathe the air in with a respiratory illness in the winter in older communities killed a lot of people. As it spreads around the world and it goes into warmer communities, as communities where the population isn't that old, and as more and more people get it, the death rates will fall. The death rate will probably only surpass influenza in terms of percentage by a very small amount by the time this pandemic is over. And I think that every scientist that looks at this, and even anybody that's good at math, and I mean elementary math, is probably thinking the same thing. But for some reason, that narrative is not shared anywhere in the public.
People like the panic. People like the action, The lives have been boring, it seems, Yeah. Everyone is very comfortable, and all of a sudden, you can stand in a almost 1 mile line next to Costco. I mean, isn't that fun, right? Excitement. So I think people almost, in some cases, it seems, long for victimization, being a victim, and of course, being able to panic, being able to be part of a panic, because at the same time it also brings people together, and there could be some sort of almost demented lust that way, where people come together because wow, there's a chance to come together. So it's weird how this sort of really polemic pandemic has pushed people apart, yet brought some together, and again instilled total submission upon the world. Kevin, thank you so much for coming to speak to us here on The Future Is Now Daily. We'll hopefully meet again in the virtual world very soon. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, the future is now. The future is what you make of it. So do remember about the things we spoke about in this inning of the show. Containment, 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 smart decisions, and new markets emerging, which is what our next episode is going to be about. The things that are now welcoming investment, the things that are now welcoming the attention and welcoming the new economy as the world transforms due to this polemical pandemic. I'm Miguel Francis-Santiago. Stay tuned to the future.